Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was March 21st, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today we've got a document from a type of register that we don't look at too often. This is the gratiarum, and it's one of Joan's registers. It's a register that has been described by the archivists at the Archive of the Crown of Aragon as one that is designated for the granting of royal privileges. So every document in this register should be some kind of commission granted or whatever else would qualify as a royal privilege. The documents in this register, like this one, often have a header, so it makes it kind of easier in a way. So on folio 5V at the bottom is where our document begins, and the header is Pro Raymundo Diebra. And we've got Shadow howling at the moon in the background here. Alright, so hopefully she will not be doing that too much and I won't have to re-record all this. We'll see. Alright, so Raymundo Diebra is being granted a position as a notary, as an official document creator for the Kingdom of Aragon. So one of the constituent pieces of the Crown of Aragon for which the realm takes its name. And so it's a big deal, and you could kind of see how in this document there's a lot of authority vested in the notary for creating the records of all sorts. I think a lot of contracts, for example, that will have the full force of law. And so if you're authorizing somebody to do that, they absolutely need to be of high trust. And that's how this document begins, saying that Raymundo Diebra has earned that reputation. There's a word in line 2 that is an interesting one, I think. It's tabelloniatus, and that means legal clerk. So the suffix atus is one that denotes an official body. So if you have done any learning about ancient Rome, there's the office of the consul, right? And then the consulatus is the official body. So the person's title is consul, but then if you're talking about the institution, you would be talking about the consulatus, and that is where we get the English word consulate, which is no longer the same kind of institution as what was going on in ancient Rome, but it's the word that's used for an office in the foreign service. And so if you're in a country outside of the United States and the embassy is not in the city that you're in, there might be a consulate. So that's a good Latin lesson. Yeah, this document is in Latin. And I was pretty happy with how my AI chatbot routine came up with a transcription and translation for this document. And I'm going to bring you into that process a little bit more. And the reason that I'm going to go deeper in is because I myself had a question about what I got at the end of the 3 stages that Claude goes through when producing a transcription and translation of the documents in late 14th century Gothic secretarial hand. So just as a reminder, I've mentioned it a couple times before on the podcast, but I'll say it again here. What I do is I start with Gemini because it seems to be in many ways better at analyzing images. But then in the thinking process that would come at the next stage, it doesn't seem to be as good. And so that's where I go to Claude. So I have both Gemini and Claude come up with a transcription of the document, whether it's in Catalan or Latin. And then I take Gemini's transcription and have Claude look at it and reconcile it with the transcription that Claude itself had made. And after that, I offer some corrections or attempts to figure out some of the tricky things. And then I have Claude do stage 3. So stage 2 is the reconciliation with what Gemini created. Stage 3 is when Claude looks at my feedback and then does another thought process about overall what it has done and what it saw from the other output. And then it creates a new revised transcription and then an English translation with footnotes about the ambiguities and difficulties. And that, I think, is a process that helps to avoid some of the pitfalls with the AI chatbot use, which is that they often are producing things that are overconfident. And in the process that I've set up, and I've called it and identified it in Claude's program as a project so that it has the same instructions each time, and I don't have to keep retyping the prompts. So in this Claude project, it has these instructions to not cover up uncertainties or ambiguities, but instead to always surface them. And that has been pretty good. All right, the thing that got me with this document very curious about what Claude did was this idea that is covered in Folio 6R in kind of the middle part of it, sort of starting in line 6. And Claude's English translation basically amounts to, we authorize you, Raymundo Diebra, in this new official position as a notary for the Crown of Aragon, to put your signature on the documents as an official attestation to their authenticity and legal force. And this is the part, provided that you are there at the time. So there's this clause that is revealing about what the values were for giving a document legal force. So what were some of the processes and values? That's really important to me because an ongoing question that I have is about whether Joan was present, and Violante too, but really because I'm looking at Joan from the lens of disability studies, I really want to know whether Joan had to be physically present with these documents at what stages. So from the initial idea that a document needed to be created to the drafting of the actual words, maybe in a verbal stage, and then the writing down of the document onto the paper, and then the signing of the document, and then at the end, the copying of the outgoing document into the registers that we're looking at now. And of course, Joan would not have had to be present at that last stage. No one would really expect that. But what were the requirements of his presence in the other stages? That's something that I'm really interested in. So when I see in this document that a key part of legal enforcement and legitimizing the legality of a new document is that the notary must be present when the contract is being signed. I mean, well, that's kind of obvious. Like, how are you going to sign something that's not present? But I think there's a little bit more going on here, which is that the creation of the legal force requires the presence of the notary in more than just kind of slapping his name down at the end. I think there's something else being expressed here about the presence of the notary. So I got really interested in the exact word choices and the grammar in this particular section of this document, which is tough because it's in Latin and you have to kind of figure out all these different choices about the prepositional phrases. So I started digging in and I noticed that Claude's transcription at the end of stage 3 had a mistake. So in line 6, pretty much in the middle, the word in the document that appears after signum is apasueris. Pretty clear to me that that's apasueris. In the transcription at the end of Claude's process, the word that comes up in the transcription is appositis. And I just cannot see how that is correct. I can see how Claude got there because the R is looking a lot like a... Oh, well, is that... Now I'm starting to doubt myself. But, okay, either the word ends in... Well, it's not a T, it's an E. So, okay, so hold on. S-U... Here's the second half of the word. S-U-E. That is absolutely clear. S-U-E. And then we've got two minims, which I think is R-I, and then a very clear S. So it could also be that those are two I's, but I'm pretty sure that it's an R. I'm zooming in on it now. So, okay, I'm right. The word is apasueris. So I went to the Latin dictionary, and guess what? It turns out that apasueris and appositis, these two different conclusions, mine and Claude's, they actually don't end up making a gigantic difference in meaning because they both have this position definition. Now, it could, when we get into the fine details of who is doing what in this sentence, it can make a gigantic difference in terms of the details of what's required, the fine details. But in terms of the sense of the sentence, it actually doesn't make a difference. And that's because at the end of the sentence in line 7, we have another really important word, which is the crux of the meaning here for the question that I have. And that word is the fourth word on line 7, interfuisse. And here we've got cats again. Okay, so we've got two cats now in the workspace. All right, so interfuisse, that means to be present, and then the word after it is confitiaris. So we had an infinitive with interfuisse, to be present, and then we've got a present subjunctive for the verb to acknowledge. So there's this idea, I know, Shadow. There's this idea that you have to have an acknowledgement of being present, and so the exact grammar, not quite sure about, but this is the sense that's being conveyed here. All right. That was really complicated, and I'm not happy that I had mewing, interrupting cats as I was trying to explain that, but that's just life. Okay, so what does this all tell me about these questions that I'm curious about regarding the establishment of legal force and the personal presence of those who are trying to establish that legal force? It tells me that their presence was important. It tells me that the body there and functioning as testifying to their bodily presence is core to establishing legitimacy, and that you can't just do things through kind of like auto pen, I guess, is what we might think of as sort of the way that sometimes there could be a delegation. Now, that's at the level of this notary for the constituent kingdom of Aragon. Is that also true for the monarch himself? Or do the chancery staff and other officials help out to stand in for the king in certain moments? That is still an open question. One last thing I want to point out about this document is that the scribe has decided to spell out the name of the day. So in the dating clause, we've got Vicissima Primera Die Marci, which is the first plus 20, so the 21st day of March. And then after the year, which actually it's been spelled out the last number of the year, Septimo. Oh my gosh, there she goes again. All right, so Septimo has been spelled out, and after that we have this really interesting phrase, which is something like Regnaque nostri primo, which I think the AI correctly translated as the first year of our reign, although I can't quite figure out what the quai is doing there in order to create that meaning. Then we've got this plus sign, which is like a symbol for a signature. And then we've got what I think is a first name and last name. I think we've got something like Dominicus and then Moscow. I know that the last name Moscow was one that was used at this time, a common last name, and also that there was someone named Domenic Moscow who was prominent in this time. I'm not quite sure if this is the same person, but that's my guess. And then the probata is a little tough. I am not quite sure what is going on. It could be Dominicus is the first word. I'm pretty sure that's right. But then maybe we have like a last name after that begins with the letter E and then X, like Ximenes or something like that. But then we've got the Mandawit, and then we've got what looks like D-O. And then the second line, we have, well, something like Rex, and then the kind of, Fuerit or Fakeit or something, pair. And then we have something that I can't quite figure out, like Vitem or something. And then something like Valencia or Valentem, maybe not having to do with Valencia. So there's a lot of stuff that I do not know about what's in this probata, we're going to keep our eye on those probatas, try to figure them out over the course of this year. All right, thanks for listening to this episode of the Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. And thanks for bearing with all of the cat noises. It's always unpleasant when you've got a cat yowling in the background. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe does it make the podcast more homey? I kind of think it does. So sometimes I just decide to leave it in, and other times I re-record. Well, if that's been very irritating to you, thank you for bearing with me. And if you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed, because good history is the kind of history that leaves you with so many more questions. You might also have been dissatisfied by the fact that there were a lot of cat noises in this podcast, so maybe that's another way I'm living up to the motto. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.